Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Historical Geology 1404. What a chilly day, huh? Isn't it like 51 or something like that right now? Yeah, I'm enjoying it too. Brisk mornings are my favorite. My ideal temperatures, I'll take 65, 66 with a breeze, or 57, no breeze. That's just, those are my ideal temperatures.
With no breeze, like the wind affects it a lot.
Yeah, wind chill is huge. 57, but with lots of sun, like, so the air is a little chilly, but the sun on your skin is keeping you warm. Oh, that's perfect. That's my ideal. All right, let's see. What do we got by way of announcements? You are now done with Module 1. We are now fully moving into new stuff. If any of you have taken organic chemistry, you may find some of what we discuss for this module familiar. If you've taken fundamental biologies, especially if you've taken biology from majors, you'll find some of this familiar. Non-majors, you definitely will, but we'll be diving into a few deeper subjects. I won't be going as deep as a biology course would. And I apologize for that because it's truly fascinating stuff. But again, we have to keep the ball rolling. So I'm just going to give you the information relevant to the conversations we're going to have. Today is November 5th, a very significant day. Anyone tell me why?
It's election day.
Oh, yeah, it is election day. I was talking about Guy Fawkes Day, actually. But Guy Fawkes Day. Guy Fawkes was a 1600s terrorist in England who hid a bomb made out of gunpowder under the Hall of Lords, the House of Lords, with intention to blow them all up while they sat in deliberation. But he was caught. The plot never actually went anywhere, but every November 5th is Guy Fawkes night over there. Kind of celebrates sticking it to the man, I guess. But no, yeah. It's Guy Fawkes Day, but it's also Election Day, which is a little bit ironic if you think of it like that. But yeah. Yes, this was in the 1600s.
Didn't they make
Is
a
it
show
16?
about it?
Yeah, V for Vendetta had major reference to Guy Fawkes. If you've ever seen the Guy Fawkes masks, like what they made in that movie, that's what it's referencing. Natalie Portman, one of her first movies. Side note, totally irrelevant, but I'm sure you'll never let me forget it. Natalie Portman, my first celebrity crush. Yeah, kind of still is, honestly. Yeah, it's on the internet now. There it is. Okay. Yeah, election day. It'll be what it'll be, and that's all I'll say about it. If you are going to vote today, please be very careful. Yeah. Bring your ID, yes. Make sure you have everything you need before you stand for 30 minutes in line. And so you don't have to go back, get what you need and stand another 30 minutes in line. Yeah, okay. Anything else going on in the world? Any questions about the class or about anything in general? No? You know, I think I've decided here in a little bit, I may actually go get Diablo. Just because he's a fantastic case study for what we're talking about today. I might get him, I might not. We'll see. We'll see how I feel about it. We'll see how y'all pick up what I'm putting down today. All right, shall we begin? If there's no other business. All right, Emily, would you grab the door for me? Emily, would you grab the door for me? Thank you. All right. So today we are starting Module 2, Lecture 5, the diversity of life. Life is crazy, okay? And I don't mean like rhetorically life, like, oh man, I've got all these things going on. That can be true as well. I'm talking about life in the broader sense. Life existing whatsoever. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. It may not be as random as you think, though. That's something that we'll talk about today. Here I have what is typically referred to as a tree of life. You've heard that term before, right? You've probably seen this before. Tree of life, a trees of life, right, is the proper plural of that. You typically find them kind of tipped over 90 degrees from the way that I have it here. So it actually looks like a tree with a root down here and branches off coming off that way. And it's meant to symbolize, it's meant to show you visually how life comes from a single root source. However diverse life is way out here on the fringes of our leaves, which typically refers to, modern day living things. The further out you go, the more recent they are in evolutionary history, right? It all comes back to a common source back here. All right, we're going to be talking a little bit about that process today. Now, I do want to point out, most trees of life are guilty of what I consider a cardinal scientific sin. And it's very hard to find a tree of life that does not do that. And that sin is, where are mammals on this tree? Point them out when you see them. Right, over here. Here's mammals. You've got monotremes, marsupials, and placentals. Which kind are we, by the way?
The kangaroo?
We're kangaroos? Not so much. Not so much. Monotremes are mammals that lay eggs. Marsupials are mammals that grow their young in a pouch. And placentals are mammals that give birth to live, mostly developed infant young. We are that one. We are placental mammals, okay? And if this were tipped over to look like a tree, where would that put us? Right at the top. That would put us right at the top. Oh, hubris, right? We put ourselves on the top of the tree. Well, I mean, we made the tree, so I guess technically speaking, it's fair. We could put ourselves wherever we want. But from a scientific perspective, it's a little biased, don't you think? That we just naturally throw ourselves as the pinnacle of evolution. We may be, but the fact that we just put ourselves up there willy-nilly, it kind of bugs me a little bit. So bear that in mind, just because most of these that you will see put placental mammals, and therefore humans, right at the top of the evolutionary food chain, so to speak. Just take that with a grain of salt. Don't let it go to your head.
Are we like the most recent? Is that why
No. Mammals have been around for a very long time, as you will learn. Okay? Mammals were around when dinosaurs were around. Long, long time ago. Matter of fact, mammals and dinosaurs share the same root ancestor. Okay? We will get to that point. But yeah, this is just something that happens all the time. And I just want you to keep some context there, okay? All right. Where does life come from? What is life? What is life made out of? How did it begin? Give me your thoughts. What is life? Huh? Carbon. All right, we definitely need carbon to sustain life as we know it. Right? Huh? Respiration. Okay, so living things need to respire, you're saying? That can be part of a definition for sure. What is life? Anything that strives to maintain homeostasis. Okay. Yeah. Reproduction. Okay, so things that strive to reproduce themselves. How does life get reproduced? What is reproduction? Is it a simple scan and copy? Or are you building another version of another, I guess you could say a copy. right? Okay, these are good. Keep them coming. I want us thinking about this for a minute before we dive into today. What else? Any other ideas? What is the fundamental building block of life? Huh? Cells? What's before cells? What are cells made of? DNA. Do you know what DNA is made out of? This is a double helix DNA strand, right? Ooh, pretty. Looks like that thing your grandma has on her porch hanging from the ceiling, right? Turns in the wind. Oh, I broke my DNA. Okay. What is DNA made out of? If you don't know, that's fine, because you're about to.
Nucleotides?
Amino acids. Okay? Amino acids. Chains of amino acids make your DNA. It also makes RNA. It also makes the basic cell walls that make, yes, your cells. Let me give you a little bit of background here about what DNA is real quick. DNA is the hard drive of your cell. You ever heard it described like that before? DNA stores all the information that a cell needs to function and replicate itself. Deoxyribonucleic acid, that's what DNA stands for, by the way, okay? It is made out of 4 basic amino acids combined together. And the ways that they are combined, which acids are combined with each other, dictate the stored data. It's a biological hard drive. Doesn't that alone blow your mind a little bit? Your cells would not be able to function. They would not be able to replicate. They would not be able to repair. They would not be able to do whatever they were supposed to do without the directive given them by the DNA controlling them. Just like a computer would not be able to do anything without memory, without a hard drive, without an operating system to give it direction. Okay? Now, if that's DNA, what is RNA? You ever heard of RNA? It's a single chain, also made out of amino acids, correct. Now, without the double chain, double helix format, you get more tied into each other. It can't store as much data. RNA isn't really for storing data. RNA, think of that as the mail service for your body, for your cells. RNAs are often used to deliver messages or instructions. If something needs to occur inside of that cell and the DNA is dictating that it be so, an RNA delivers that message for it to happen. Okay? Think of it as the electron impulse going through the wiring of your computer to make something appear on your screen. DNA is your hard drive. RNA is that signal going to your screen to deliver an image. Okay? It makes that happen. So DNA and RNA together dictate much of the function of your body. Our bodies are extraordinarily complex mechanisms made out of trillions and trillions of cells, each of which is dictated by this DNA RNA system. Now that you have a little bit of context for DNA and RNA, remember that the amino acids, we'll talk more about the amino acids in a moment. Life on Earth has developed several mechanisms, which we call metabolisms, for taking raw ingredients, processing them, and turning them into fundamental nutrition that your DNA and RNA need to sustain a cell network. Okay? You and I, what do we eat? What are some things we eat? What is that, a monster? Okay. Chocolate. Meat. Good. Plants. Those are the two things I was looking for there. Okay. Monster and chocolate, not so much, but yeah, they fulfill a function. Okay. They also affect us in certain ways. It's needed for survival. Okay. Well, all right. But let's talk about meat and plants for a second there. We kind of separate living things in our world into two categories, producers and consumers, right? You've heard of that before. I'm going to kind of broaden that a little bit into photosynthesizers and chemosynthesizers. Okay? These are two ways of producing the energy necessary for something to continue living. Photosynthesizers. Give me an example of a photosynthesizer. Tree, plants. Plants are photosynthesizers. Photosynthesizing organisms absorb light from the sun and use that light, that energy, light is energy, right? They use that radiation energy that they absorb to break apart molecules into what they need. So, for example, a tree will absorb carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and, water vapor and all of the other things it's absorbing. And it will use a photosynthetic mechanism in its cells to break apart that carbon dioxide. It will release water vapor and O2 and retain carbon and some oxygen. And what does it build with that? Wood, structure, cells. It slowly builds itself over time, utilizing the carbon that it took from the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That is a photosynthetic process. That is the first metabolism. The next one is chemosynthetic. Chemosynthetic organisms utilize oxidation processes. They basically take materials into themselves and then use a chemical process to produce the energy necessary to break them apart, not a process that's derived from the sun. Name of a chemosynthetic organism. Huh?
Like mushrooms?
Mushrooms. Okay, yes. Us. We are chemosynthetic organisms. We absorb nutrition or materials, I should say, from our environment, eating them, right? And then inside of our bodies are cells that use chemosynthetic processes to break that apart for the nutrition our body needs. Now, what nutrition am I talking about? Now, you look at the ingredients on a bottle of, I don't know, protein milk or whatever, and it says has calcium, has vitamin D, has this, has that, vitamins, minerals, protein, fiber, calories, all the things, right? We don't really look any deeper into that usually. But what does your body really need? What does your body need at its most fundamental level to sustain itself? Amino acids. Okay? We essentially, yes, there is fiber that's good for your digestive tract. Yes, there's protein that's good for your muscles. But what does your body break things down to ultimately? What your cells need to sustain proper growth and function. And a lot of that comes down to a variety of amino acids necessary to support life. There are, I believe, last I checked the literature on the subject, 9 amino acids that our bodies utilize on a daily basis to sustain ourselves. And yes, the food you eat and the stuff that you drink goes towards sustaining that process. There are 4 that make our fundamental DNA chains. Okay, let's talk about that. But before I talk about that, actually, where does life come from? How did it start? I asked this a few minutes ago, and now we're finished with the other conversation. Let's talk about this. How did life begin? In the ocean? Okay, that is a very common theory, that life started in the ocean, and as far as the fossil record is concerned, you are right, sir. But let's go even further back than that. Huh? Bacteria, yeah, okay. Bacteria, even further back than bacteria. What must have happened before bacteria? What must have happened before single-celled organisms? And if you don't know, that's fine. I'll walk you through it. Amino acids. Right? We're walking this backwards. If multicelled organisms came from single-celled organisms, if single-celled organisms require DNA to function, and if DNA can't be made without a combination of amino acids must form first. But can amino acids just form like that? Do they just all of a sudden appear in the ocean? And do they lock themselves into this shape naturally? What happened here? Well, there are two theories on the subject. Earth could have been the starting point for life. Absolutely. Our oceans, we have done experiments to replicate what the chemistry of the oceans 4 billion years ago must have been like. First of all, way shallower, way hotter. The atmosphere, far different. More methane, more ammonia, more sulfur. Far less things. Matter of fact, initially, no oxygen whatsoever, unless it was bonded to something else. Oxygen is a tricky element to work with because it binds with so many things. It binds with sulfur, it binds with carbon, it binds with metals. And then it gets taken underground and locked away for so long before it comes back up to the surface through volcanic processes. So when you only have so much oxygen and it's always bonded to something, it doesn't really make it into the atmosphere, right? So there isn't really any oxygen in the atmosphere except what is bonded into a more complex molecule, like an ammonia, right? So our atmosphere and our water chemistry, therefore, very different back then. There is a theory called panspermia. You ever heard of this before? Panspermia basically suggests that life began somewhere else and came here. How could it have come here? Well, we still receive visitors from other places all the time. We call them asteroids and meteorites. We don't get them nearly as much as we did back then. Billions and billions of years ago, Earth was getting slammed left, right, and center by stuff. Matter of fact, we got hit by a whole planet at one point, didn't we? So with all of these things, all this debris coming from other places, perhaps blasted off of other planets, perhaps we got hit by some other planet's moon, all these things hitting Earth, adding to its mass, perhaps one of these visitors brought something that Earth did not have before. If the first organic materials came to Earth from another place, does that make everything and all organisms that came from that material, does that make us all aliens? What do you guys think? It's a very interesting theory, doesn't it? Isn't it? Either life started here or it didn't start here. It's a 1 and a 0. It's, it's...
No in between.
Yeah. It's either it started here or it didn't. If it did start here, there's plenty of data to suggest that it could have. Why? Because Earth's ancient oceans, our chemistry was filled. We call our ocean a primordial soup back then. Why? Because it's filled with so many chemicals, really so many chemical reactions were happening, right? It is absolutely possible, probable even, that chains of amino acids could develop in such a situation and, yeah, bond together to start making proteins, to start making what would eventually become DNA strands. Okay? By the way, these are your 4 amino acids that are necessary for DNA. Okay? Adenine, guanine, cytosine, and thymine. If you look at this model here, you see that each color has a different letter associated with it. That's to show you, just to give you an example of how they bond together. Remember that the ways that these 4 are bonded together dictate what the code is in that particular DNA strand. Okay? Now, did this happen on Earth or did it happen somewhere else? Well, for the longest time, people were like, oh, of course it happened on Earth. We had the water. We had the UV radiation from the sun. We had all the things in the atmosphere that could encourage this to happen. Of course it happened here. And so everyone took that for granted for the longest time. But there are always people that aren't really satisfied with what everyone else goes along with, right? We like to call them scientists. Okay? So people were conducting experiments. One of these experiments, conducted by 2 guys, Miller and Urey, in 1952, is probably one of the most significant experiments that our species will ever know or has known up to this point, but no one ever really talks about it. It kind of flew under the radar. I think it's one of the most important, though. They put together a mechanism, which I should probably have a diagram of up here, but I didn't put one together in time. This diagram, or this mechanism, basically introduced gases of what we believe the atmosphere had, and a little water, though not much, and an electrical charge. Okay? And it introduced them all in a reducing environment, and they just let it sit there for a while. Some heat, some electric charge, right? Because you have to maintain a temperature equal to what you believe the surface conditions would have been like. Yeah? Exposed?
I think I heard of this. It's like a ball. Almost.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other one was like the same thing, but it was just...
There were multiple attempts to run this experiment. Some people did it without an electric charge. They just put UV radiation through it, like what would be coming through the atmosphere. The electric charge is basically supposed to replicate, say, if lightning struck at just the right moment, right? There 100% was lightning back then. Static is still static, regardless of atmospheric conditions. So there were a couple of different ways that people ran this experiment, but they did it this particular way, okay, with a particular concentration of all these gases, ran an electric charge through it. Remember, everything they put in there, totally inorganic. And you know what they came out with? Amino acids and a couple of other organic byproducts. They made organic material that can build amino acid chains out of inorganic ingredients. Now, for so many people, that implied, well, that settles it. Life started here. They replicated our atmosphere and oceans. But is that all that means? No. What else could it imply? The results of this experiment proving that with inorganic material, you can make organic material that can then go on to make DNA. What else does that imply?
That it could have been somewhere else.
It can happen somewhere else. Earth is not unique in having a whole bunch of inorganic materials. Moons and planets in our own solar system have all of that. Venus has an atmosphere. Venus's atmosphere is filled with carbon dioxide and probably water. It's mostly carbon dioxide, though, so it's hard to tell at times. It's a solid planet with a thick atmosphere. Why have we always assumed that life couldn't exist there? Well, because it's too hot. I'll come back to that point in a minute. But Venus has an atmosphere and it has water, and therefore, Miller and Urey, there could be organic material there. And if there's organic material there, life could develop. Life that can withstand such temperatures could develop. Okay? What about a super cold place? What about Europa or Titan or Enceladus? Absolutely possible. Organic material can be made from inorganic sources naturally. Proven. Okay? As a matter of fact, we can look out in space, and we have, using powerful telescopes. You can look out in space, and you know that the wavelengths that you receive tell you information about what particles, what molecules are present either in space or in planetary atmospheres. That's how we know that there are planets out there that have atmosphere beyond our solar system, right? We can even tell that some planets have water beyond our solar system, just by the wavelengths of light that reflect off of those surfaces, okay? We can see adenine. There is so much adenine that's just hanging out in space. There are clouds of the stuff. And if it's in space, it's probably in a lot of other places too. So this has added to the debate. Since we know that this can happen on Earth, but it also can happen probably almost anywhere else, did we start here? Or did we hitchhike here? I don't know. Fires the imagination, though, doesn't it? Very interesting. That is the panspermia theory, that life began somewhere else and came here. Could have begun on Mars. We have rocks on Earth that came from Mars. When Mars gets a huge impact, if you ever look at the surface of Mars, you'll see some massive craters. Mars gets a huge impact, debris gets blasted off into space. It cycles its way through our solar system until finally it gets caught in Earth's gravity, falls through our atmosphere, and lands here. We have chunks of Mars on Earth. And there are chunks of Earth on Mars, by the way, through the same process. Did something happen? Did something start on Mars? Because remember, we know that Mars had water billions of years ago. Did life start on Mars, get wiped out, but before it get wiped out, some of it hitchhiked its way here? I don't know. Don't know. It's part of the exciting thing that we're trying to do by studying Mars and learning more about planets outside our solar system. Very, very, very cool stuff. There's that adenine that's so common everywhere that we look. Okay, so let's back up just a little bit and go back to what our criterion for being alive is. What does living mean? What does it mean to be alive? With some things we talked about. Being able to replicate. Okay, reproduction, right? What is reproduction except self-replication? In the case of life as you and I live it, it requires two individuals, but that is not always true in the plant or animal kingdom, is it? No. Matter of fact, there are animals. My thesis dissertation was about ostracods, which are a type of tiny little crustacean that when their environment is stressful enough, they will reproduce sexually. But when conditions are good and they aren't experiencing high environmental stress, they will reproduce parthenogenically. They just copy themselves. They lay eggs that are exact clones of themselves. And then the next time the environment gets stressful and they need some genetic diversity to improve survivability, they start reproducing sexually again to improve the gene pool and encourage a little bit of evolution. So, sexual reproduction is not always 100% a given, but reproduction always is. some kind of it. So, and then self-regulation. Who was it that said breathing? I don't remember. Was it you? You said breathing? Yeah, respiration is an example of self-regulation. We are maintaining eating, breathing, sleeping, drinking. All these things are maintaining this. I am regulating this to survive. Okay? So is every other living thing. So then, this is an example of a cell splitting apart, by the way. That's a cell division. Okay. Someone give me an example of something that may or may not be alive then. Ah, this is the question. Are viruses alive? Do you know what a virus is? What is it? Yeah.
Isn't it? I can't remember exactly. I remember learning about it. It's like they don't consider not living because they just hatch on or latch onto it.
Okay, so we're jumping a little ahead. I want to know if anyone can tell me what a virus is. And then we'll come back to the is it alive? But please bring that comment back when we get there. What is a virus?
Something that latches onto something else.
Right, that's kind of what he was saying. But I'm looking for more along the lines of what is it made out of? Huh?
I feel like I remember.
Is it amino acids?
Yes. A virus is an amino acid chain, which is either a true RNA or very similar to an RNA. There are RNA viruses out there. So you can think of them bear with me on this example, okay? I described RNA as the mail service of the cell, right? You can think of a virus as that disgruntled mail worker who took his truck and is now driving off his route, slamming into mailboxes and doing all sorts of chaos as he can. He's not being controlled by anything other than his will to create chaos, if you want to think of it like that. A virus is an amino acid structure like RNA, or is RNA itself, which, yes, will latch on to other structures and take them over. Now, is it alive? What an RNA virus does is it will attack a cell, burrow into that cell, and then slowly hijack that cell, take all the ingredients of stuff in there, the DNAs, the RNAs, the cell structures, and force them into copies of itself. Huh? Not like cancer. I can talk about cancer in a minute. Okay? It's basically hijacking other things and forcing them to become clones of itself. Exact copies, chain for chain for chain. Does that make it self-replication? Is that reproduction? Okay, Angel says it is. Let's talk about it.
I don't think it is, because it's like he's not using another one of himself. He's using another thing, like a virus. The virus is using another thing other than itself.
Okay, so it's taking raw materials or materials belonging to another organism and recombining them into a copy of itself. And your debate is that means it is not true reproduction. Okay.
I think that the example that you gave about the crabs that reproduce themselves by clones, they're alive.
They are alive. And they can reproduce parthenogenically, making copies of themselves. But it doesn't come at the cost of taking another organism and reducing it to that. Let me give you an example of this. If I could take a whole bunch of, let's say, silicon and carbon and oxygen and a whole bunch of other inorganic materials and make a structure that could speak and think and act and reason out of completely inorganic materials, would that thing be alive? You're not sure, are you? And this is our problem with AI, friends. The same debate about whether or not viruses are alive is very similar to, is AI alive, or could it reach alive? There are AIs that are already so advanced that you can carry on a conversation with them. Do you know what the Turing test is? The Turing test was established a long time ago when AIs were first theorized. The Turing test, simply stated, is if you can have a conversation with an AI, say over the phone, and have absolutely no idea that you are having a conversation with an AI, you think it's a person, then it has passed the test and it has reached person status. We've had AIs that passed Turing tests for about a decade now. I've talked to a few. It's disconcerting because they seem to have personalities. Now, it's all programming, but how much of this is programming? How much of it is programming? Huh? We are not at organic AI, no. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the human body is a fascinating example for us to work off of, for us to work from. The brain can contain so much information. An incredible amount of data can be stored. And we only use a very small part of it, right? So the attempt to synthetically recreate a human brain and then put an AI in that brain that is capable of using more of it is simultaneously fascinating and a terrifying thought. It sounds like Ultron, yeah. Yeah.
It was like a human brain. I think it was like stem cells or something.
Yeah, you used to become a flesh stem cell.
They hooked it up to like an electricity plate in the simulation, so you could feel.
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. We are getting there. So that is why we are facing ethical questions right now of rights for AI. Do they have rights? Because if we determine by our definition of life, they are alive, they should have rights, should they not? Angel says no. Okay, why no?
Because they can't breathe.
They can't breathe. But for an organism that doesn't need to breathe in the first place, should we redefine what life is? This is that. What did I just say? Should we redefine what life is? Should AI force us to that point? And if it does, are viruses alive? And if viruses are alive, is X, Y, and Z? You know, there's all of these questions. We live in a very unique time right now, my friends, where we have the potential to rewrite things that society has taken for granted for a very long time. What life is. Can we make it? By being able to make life, might be playing with fire with this comment a little bit. Does that elevate us a little bit? Does that help us understand what, if you believe in this, God may feel like? Interesting debates, are they not? Yeah.
So DNA is like a code, right?
DNA is a code.
So, you know, like AI is also coded.
AI is also coded. If this is a code that dictates every function of your body, from the smallest cell to the thought you're thinking right now, as you look at me going, when are we going to change the subject? Right? If you are dictated by that code, what makes an AI not as alive as you? Conscience, remorse, emotion. That's the big hang up right now. But if a human brain can be grown and can feel things like pain and pleasure and happiness, then maybe an AI will someday too.
And you never think to go get AI things like coming out, they have to be like alive.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting times ahead, my friends. Interesting times ahead. Now, as of right now, though, we are going to say that viruses are not alive. So I'm just going to put that to bed right now. That was a fun conversation with our current definition of life. And until things in the artificial intelligence world get ironed out a little bit and link up with the biology world and they can come to a conclusion about what life really is, we are all under the consideration that viruses are not actually alive. Okay? They do not perform the same functions that life as we currently have the definition do. I like to think of viruses as androids. For all you Trekkies out there, you can think of them as the Borg. Okay? Literally an organism or something, I can't say an organism, a thing dictated by a mission. And that single mission is make more of me. That's all a virus does. When your body has a virus, when you have a cold or a flu or the COVID or whatever it is, you are being invaded by all these little suckers slamming into your cells, spending a day or two in those cells, transforming it into 1 million copies of itself, each of which will go out and try and find a cell. Now, how does your body respond? It generates white blood cells. White blood cells are a natural defense mechanism that your body has developed, which are designed to attack and destroy invading cells. They are designed and specialized for taking out bacterial infections. Can you kill something that isn't alive? No, you can't kill a virus. What can you do? Get it out. So when your body has a viral infection, you get sick because your body can't fight it at first. But then, why do you get weak and tired and sore? That's your body ignoring other systems for a little bit while it drives its immune system into overdrive to produce 1,000 times more white blood cells than it typically would, because each of those white blood cells goes and seeks out viruses, smothers them, and then goes to a waste disposal unit. Your poop, your urine, your snot, when you throw up when you're sick, all of these ways that your body gets rid of waste is full of white blood cells that have smothered up viral strains, okay? And when you get better, it's when your body has finally overcome enough of the viral infection, it's gotten rid of enough of it that your body can recover, okay? That's what that is. Any questions about DNA or RNA or viruses or any of that? Okay. Let's talk about the ways that life gets preserved then. We call the preservation of life, when we find a relic of life in rock, we call that a fossil, right? You're already familiar with that term. When something is fossilized, that means that its cells have been replaced. Replaced with what? Minerals. Now, the cell has the DNA. That's a little too delicate to survive the process, right? So I get asked all the time, could we ever actually make Jurassic Park? My answer is yes, but not the way that Jurassic Park looks. Okay? You would not have dinosaurs running around with a little bit of frog DNA in them. You would have chickens running around that we've managed to regress a little bit to the point where they have some dinosaur in them, right? We'll talk about that more later. Only the hard parts of organisms are typically preserved. Why do you suppose that is? They're what? They're harder to break down. Okay, so soft tissues. Name some soft tissues for me. Skin, hair, muscle, yeah, organs. Anything that is a soft part of your body does not get fossilized. Typically, I'll get back to that typically in a minute. The vast majority of all of the fossils are going to be those hard parts. Now, for animals, that'll mean shells and bones and teeth and claws and all of that. For plants, that means cellulose. I'll talk about cellulose on the next slide. There are a couple of ways that life can get fossilized, that it can get replaced. Mineral replacement, that just means maybe calcite or silica or whatever was moving through the groundwater at the time replaced those cell structures. Something has to be around to replace those structures, and it's usually whatever is in the groundwater as the hard part is being replaced. Carbonization, that's when carbon replaces it. This can get really cool. I would have an example here for you, except that they don't live very long in atmosphere. But I'll tell you a story. When I was out in Montana working on the pipeline before I came here, there was one place that we dug, and we ended up pulling up chunks of tree. Like, we exposed a piece of forest that had been preserved. Most of the trees had been preserved with silica, and I actually have a few examples of them here that I've shown you previously, right? But some of the trees have been replaced by carbon, because my assumption is at one point there was a wildfire and there was a lot of carbon locked into the soil from that wildfire. And that carbon went on to replace some of the tree trunks. So when I pulled up these trees, just big old chunks of trees, absolutely just charcoal black, but all the perfect shape and grain structure of a tree, just pitch black and made out of carbon. It had been completely replaced. It didn't last the day, though, because once they were out of the ground and exposed to the dry air, they cracked, they broke, and they fell apart into carbon dust by the end of the day. So I don't have a sample to show you, but it was really cool when I found them. Huh? I have pictures, but I don't have them on the slideshow. I probably should remember to throw them in there, but okay. Now, I told you that there are exceptions, a few rare exceptions to the only hard parts get fossilized rule. When we find preserved fossilized soft tissues, we call that a Lagerstätten. That's a fun word to say. Go, you can try it if you want. Lagerstätten. Now, this is very rare because, like we said before, only the hard parts are preserved easily. The soft parts decay too quickly. So under what circumstances would soft tissues be preserved? Huh? If it's covered quickly, if it's cut off from oxygen, if it falls into, say, a swamp, an anoxic environment, if there is a big old landslide and whatever organism we're talking about, like a dinosaur or a worm, right? That's a worm fossil right there. Worms have no hard parts. How is there a worm fossil? It got buried so quickly that there was no time for decay before it got completely encased in that sediment. And so, yeah, soft part preservation took place. Rare, but really cool. This is how we know what dinosaur skin looked like. This is how we know that dinosaurs had feathers all the way back in the Jurassic. Okay? These Lagerstättens that are found. Now, plants, like I said, they don't have hard parts. They don't have horns or teeth, do they? They don't have bones. What they do have is cellulose. Cellulose is a tissue that does not break down very easily. It is rigid. It makes a sort of, well, it varies, plant type to plant type, but think of them as kind of like a honeycomb sort of structure in the cell tissues of your plant. And other tissues fill in the spaces between them. Think of them as having the development of cellulose in plant evolution is what made enough rigidity that they could start growing tall and big out of the water. Okay? It is what provides the structural support within the tissues of a plant, is cellulose. So it is cellulose that remains behind and maintains the structure of that plant. And in between the cellulose structures is where the minerals fill in, okay, and make your fossil. We call that permineralization. Some other examples of fossilization. Molds and casts are the positives and negatives that you get when a fossil was replaced and then is now gone. So you'll get your cast is that positive, whatever your replaced fossil is. So like here, okay, that's your cast. And then your mold is the negative. And you can see this negative, this mold came off of this cast. But sometimes you'll just find these. This is long gone, but you'll find that, okay? And then there are trace fossils. Evidence of life without actually being part of that life itself, right? Footprints, right? If I left a footprint in the sand and then it got filled in and it became a fossil, no one would ever call that a fossil of Josh Hart. They would call that my footprint, okay? And it would be a trace fossil. And if they could figure out it belonged to Josh Hart, then paleontology has come a lot longer, further at that point in time. Things like burrows, chemical remains, things like that, okay? Those are trace fossils.
Are things like molds and impressions like equal in importance, or is there like one more important?
Yeah, they're very important. We make molds of fossils all the time. Like this megalodon tooth here, that one is not real. This one is. That one's not. I would never be able to afford one that big, right? But I have a cast of it because someone took the real one, compressed it in some silicone or plaster until it hardened, took that out, took the real one out, and then was able to make copies out of that mold. So we can do the same thing with natural molds that we find. And we can make actual copies and then disperse those copies for study in multiple locations. Whenever you go to a museum and you see a skeleton of Allosaurus fragilis, it's usually a copy of the exact same skeleton. A skeleton that is sitting in Utah that I've had the opportunity to hold the pieces of and do some studies on. Okay, I've actually been able to hold the original skeleton, but they made copies of each one of its bones, and usually a museum will just buy a set of that and then paint it to look like the real bones. I'm sorry to break hearts here. Most of the skeletons that you see in museums are copies.
What about the T-Rex?
Mostly copies. Think about how heavy all of those bones are. And would you really risk hanging something that important from steel wire?
Especially around
So most of the skeletons you see in dinosaur museums are copies of the originals, and the originals are safely tucked away in a museum somewhere, in a drawer. Sorry to break your hearts there, but what you're looking at is exactly what the bones look like. It's just not the bones itself typically. Most big museums will have a few real skeletons out there, but they're usually in glass cases rather than suspended from hangers or built to look like the actual dinosaur itself. Because to suspend them, you usually have to drill into them. You really don't want to do that to a real bone. Okay. Any other questions about that? So let's talk about the ways that life changes. Why does life change at all? What do we call the process of life changing? Evolution. Now, life can change on the large scale and on the small scale. Angel, have you changed over your lifetime? Yeah? Emily, have you changed over your lifetime? Cade, you've changed over your lifetime? No, you stayed the same? You were born, what are you, 5'8", 5'9"? Yeah, cool. Poor mom. Regardless of Cade's ridiculousness, we all change, right? However, is that change that you have experienced over your lifetime, is that evolutionary change? No. Those are the normal changes of growth, right? Ontogenic changes. You went from baby to this, and you'll probably still grow a little bit more over your lifetime. The older you get, the more that growth is going to be side to side. Sorry about that. That's just the society we live in. So, as you are changing, your DNA is dictating those changes. It is saying this bone needs to be longer. This ear needs to be wider. This hair needs to be longer. You need to start doing this when you're 12 years old, called puberty, right? All of that is dictated by your DNA. Your DNA is on a certain time clock that dictates when those things happen. And there's a little bit of variation, but we all stick to approximately the same schedule. However, a species changes significantly over time. From our species, let's say, where we are now versus where we were 140,000 years ago, do you think there's been some change? A little bit. What about where mammals were 50 million years ago? What about where vertebrates were 300 million years ago? A lot has changed. This is evolution. Evolution happens in the DNA. When there is a change that occurs in your DNA, it is called a mutation. What causes mutation? Environmental input. Most of the time it's radiation. Yeah. What radiation source could be causing all of this mutation? The sun. Now, when you go outside and you spend time in the sun, you're going to get a sunburn, right? Your skin turns red. A few days later, it starts to flake off. Why? Because the solar radiation has killed the outer layer of cells in your skin. So they don't get cancer? Your cells don't know that. Your cells don't have a brain. Your cells are dictated by basic functions. Your cells aren't sacrificing themselves. They are dying, and as a consequence, not getting cancer. Okay? Cells can't kill themselves. They have a function. Yeah, skin cells' function is to keep all our organs in place and to act as a protective barrier from the outside. Think of it as your first line of defense to that radiation, right? If your skin was thinner, more of that radiation would get into your internal organs and cook you a little bit. But instead, it stays on the outer surface of your skin. It gets red, and then it dies, and then it falls off. If you want to put it in terms of they're sacrificing themselves for me, then feel free, but they're not making that choice. It's just something that happens. Right, well, killing themselves implies that they choose to do that. They're not. They are dying, and as a consequence, you're not getting cancer most of the time. People do get cancer from skin exposure, from sun exposure. Right, well, we're not going to go too deep into the cancer subject. I did promise you I'd talk about it a little bit. For those of you that aren't aware, cancer is what happens when your body loses control of certain cell processes. Yes, so your cells start overproducing. You get cancer when cells are doing too much of a good thing, ironically enough. You have cells on your bladder wall or cells in your lungs, which are going to overdrive, usually because some stimuli cause them to. Lung cancer usually happens to people that smoke. Your body is reacting to a pollutant that you are putting in your lungs. And as it's trying to regrow your lung tissue, something goes wrong. It's gotten too messed up from all of the damage from the smoking. And so it starts growing these massive tumors. You get tumors on your bladder. You get tumors on your skin. You get tumors in your brain because your body's cells are overproducing, overbuilding in that location. It's ironic that your body's attempt to repair or improve something actually ends up killing you. It's a cruel irony, but that's essentially what it comes down to for cancer. Now, how do we fix that? We cut that away usually. And if we can cut the offending cells away and remove them, then that programming is gone. When cancer comes back, it's often because not enough of the broken cells with the bad programming were removed. Yeah.
So you can get cancer like anywhere.
Pretty much. Yeah.
How's bone cancer happen?
Bone cancer, same thing. Yeah. It starts producing cancerous growths on your bone or in your bone.
So how would that happen? Just like
Your bones are made out of cells just like anything else, especially in the marrow.
so one thing you said that something can cause cancer.
Yeah, external stimuli can cause it.
What do you like?
Well, radiation can cause that. Certain chemicals. Bone cancer can be caused by the ingestion of certain chemicals that we know now are very dangerous. But during the 70s and 80s, they didn't know, right? I can't give you a name of a chemical off the top of my head, but asbestos can cause lung cancer. We know that now for the similar reasons that smoking does.
But it smells good.
What asbestos does? Angel is going around sniffing asbestos. He just like whips a bunch of it out of his pocket. It's from the ceiling. It's from the ceiling in his house. Yikes.
I kick it, the ceiling.
You just snort it all in. Oh my gosh. Okay. Okay, so that's cancer. Yes, sun exposure can cause cancer because it changes the DNA to the point where your cells start growing out of control. Radiation, how does it cause a change in your DNA? Well, you've got all these particles, alpha, beta, delta, gamma radiation, that are constantly pelting your cells. Most of them don't make it through the skin. Some of them do. And when that happens, and radiation, does that, okay? It'll flick off an adenine here, or a thymine there. Or it'll give some energy to that and cause a change. This adenine could all of a sudden be replaced by a guanine, okay? It causes changes in your DNA. And as it causes these changes in your DNA, it's like flipping a 1 and a 0 in computer code. Doesn't that change the whole message? Yeah. Right? You change one line of code in your computer, and your computer could be totally thrown off. So there are probably there are definitely entire strains of DNA in cells that something happens, and all of a sudden they can't even function anymore, and that's when your cells die. Yeah.
So is that what happened to the guys that cleaned up Chernobyl, right? Their cells couldn't reproduce or anything, so they were just decaying.
Exactly. Chernobyl. You're all familiar with the incident at Chernobyl? There's a fantastic mini-series about it on HBO Max, if you are not. Chernobyl, nuclear disaster. What happens in a nuclear disaster? The reactor is exposed. Chernobyl didn't blow up. Yeah, it didn't really blow up. There was an incident that caused part of the reactor containment to crumble away, and so it was exposed to the air. And what's it spitting out? Radiation and particles that are irradiated and now themselves letting out radiation. Okay, what did that radiation do to everyone nearby? Gave them radiation poisoning. A bad sunburn is a mild case of radiation poisoning. When you inhale radioactive particles, that's it. Your skin isn't stopping any of that. Your organs are now glowing like a microwaved fork. Yeah. Yes, the people that stayed at Chernobyl and did what they could to help the situation, many of them heroes, okay, as they strove to fix the situation and save as many people as they could. They died because they basically melted from the inside out. Because what happens to radiation, or what happens to your DNA as it's pelted with radiation? It falls apart. The DNA that makes your cells fall apart, your cells start to fall apart. Your cells start to fall apart, your organs fall apart. Your organs fall apart. What do you call that? You're melting. They basically melted to death.
So radiation can cause cancer, just cause you to melt.
Oh, radiation can hugely cause cancer, but only massive doses of it. Well, not only that. Like the melting, that came from a massive dose. It doesn't take a whole lot of radiation in the right place for you to get cancer. As a matter of fact, they also use radiation therapy to destroy cancerous cells because they're basically melting it at the cellular level. But they target it. They use a fine little laser thin radiation spike, okay? Like just beep, beep, just small little doses of it where the tumor is, and it basically just destroys all the cells, and those whatever's left over gets reabsorbed into the system, okay? That's radiation therapy for cancer treatments. Any other questions about that? No? Okay. Let's go back to mutations then, okay? For the sake of time. We're about an hour in. Okay, so mutation is any change that occurs to the DNA, right? So as this radiation is hitting your DNA, a lot of the time it's going to make a change that really doesn't make a difference. The DNA is like, whatever, that doesn't change a whole lot. Or the DNA is going to unravel because it can't work anymore. It's a line of code that's broken and that cell dies. But because it was only a change that happened to that one cell, it doesn't make much of a difference, right? Or something will change that the code can reconcile, right? It's like, oh, that works. And then all of a sudden, your cell starts behaving differently. And if it behaves in a way that is efficient enough, it gets replicated through the whole system. This is the crux of evolution. This is how fish crawl on land. This is how bugs develop wings. This is how plants grew flowers. This is how every evolutionary breakthrough that ever existed happened. A mutation that ended up being positive for the organism. It improved the survivability, perhaps. Some examples. Let's say a random mutation occurs in a dog that causes it to be born with 3 legs. Positive or negative mutation? Why would it be a negative mutation? Yeah, can a 3-legged dog run very well? Or at all? Not really. Can't escape a predator? Not going to live long. Therefore, that gene doesn't get passed through the gene pool. Why? Because that organism does not live long enough to reproduce and therefore pass the gene on. So it dies right there. That's it. That mutation doesn't go any further. What about if a dog was born with sharper teeth or extra long legs? Higher survivability chance. Both of those mutations will allow it to hunt faster, more lethally. It'll live for at least one breeding period, probably. The fact that it is more successful than its competitors means that it'll probably breed more than them too. Live longer, be more of an attractive mate. And therefore, those genes get passed into the gene pool and manifest themselves in successive generations, right? A human is born with blue eyes instead of brown eyes. Positive, negative? Negative. Oh, Angel's biased. Okay. It doesn't make much of a difference, does it? It might matter on like in the mating scene if someone values blue eyes over brown eyes, but it's not going to stop you from finding a mate at all, is it? No. That's the sort of example of a thing that doesn't really matter much. So there are positive mutations, there are negative mutations, and there are those that kind of come and go and don't have a whole lot of impact on the survivability or success of an individual or a species. Far, far, far the majority, by far the majority of mutations fall into the it didn't matter a whole lot category. But the ones that make a big difference, those positive ones, they get passed into the gene pool. The negative ones don't make it very far. Successful traits get passed on. Unsuccessful traits die on the vine because the individuals don't survive to mate. Let me give you some examples, okay? This is the rock pocket mouse. Ah, cute. Diablo was here, he'd be going, whoopsh, 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 right? No. Both of these individuals are in the same species, rock pocket mouse. As a matter of fact, both of these are found not far from each other. What's the difference? The color, exactly. One is black, one is tan. Out in Arizona, where these pictures were taken, the population of rock pocket mice goes through the desert and over an old basalt lava flow. Now, when a rock pocket mouse that has a tan color to blend in with the desert goes onto a black basalt lava flow, is it easier or harder to see? Easier. The hawks will see it, the foxes will see it. Every predator that loves eating rock pocket mice will see that a whole lot easier on the black background. So, for a long time, who knows how long, rock pocket mice that lived on the basalt lava flow were easier prey. But then along comes a mutation. Flick. The right flick in the right place. And all of a sudden, you get a rock pocket mouse that is born with darker fur. Random mutation. That rock pocket mouse, harder to see on the black lava flow, survives, lives, breeds, passes that gene on. Who knows how many generations later, another mutation. Flick, even darker fur, even more successful. Now, you have a population of black rock pocket mice on the lava flow and tan rock pocket mice out in the desert around the flow. If a black rock pocket mouse goes out into the desert, easy to see. If a tan rock pocket mouse goes onto the lava flow, easy to see. They stay in their own boundaries. The same species, simply separated because of the type of background that they live on. Only possible because of random mutations that caused that. Interesting, huh? That's an example of a successful mutation that's passed on to generations. Make sense? Yeah? Let me give you one more example. I believe it's in Kenya, in Africa, there is a preserve, an elephant preserve, that is often the target of poachers. It's a terrible, terrible trade. I don't know how many of you know about this, but there is constantly a war between poachers and ecology, what do you call themselves? Militarized ecology preservationists, okay, out there. These are literally people that are armed and spend all their time out there protecting the elephants from poachers. And they are at war with the poachers. There are gunfights between poachers and the militarized protectionists all the time. They're killing each other all the time out there to try and get the elephants or defend the elephants. But there is a herd of elephants out there that have no tusks. Why? At one point, there was a baby elephant, a male baby elephant born with a random mutation. Flick, no tusks. Why do poachers go after elephants? They carve off their tusks. They couldn't care less about anything else. Shoot the elephant, cut off the tusks, go. Elephant doesn't even already have to be dead yet. They'll just carve off the tusks before the elephant's even dead. Terrible. And then they'll just leave it there to die. Sorry that got dark, but it's some things you need to know. Hopefully, maybe we can do something about it. Regardless, elephant born without tusks. Was that ever going to be the target of a poacher? No. So here we are with an example of a mutation. An elephant born without tusks. Why do elephants have tusks in the first place? Well, they use them to fight, for self-defense, to knock trees down, things like that. They are good for elephants in the wild, but on this preserve, where poachers are the biggest threat, an elephant without tusks isn't worth the bullet. And so this elephant that normally in nature would have died before it even reached its first year probably, is now the most successful genotype to have, has the most successful gene in the area. And therefore, it lived and breeded again and breeded again. And its children don't have tusks. And now there is an entire herd developing out there of tuskless elephants that are surviving far better than the rest of the elephants because they are lacking the thing that the poachers want. Here's an example of how humans have influenced the evolution of a species. Can you think of any other species that we have influenced the evolution of through our actions? Oh, you both hit on the exact things I was looking for. Dogs would not exist without our intervention. Dogs never existed naturally in nature. Dogs only exist because we domesticated wolves thousands of years ago, and since then have picked and choose which traits we want, and that's what's developed the different types of dog we have today. Okay? What did you say? Ourselves. How have we changed the evolutionary path of ourselves? What did you say? Traveling? Are you saying interbreeding of populations?
Yeah, more like changing environments,
Changing environments?
like temperature and everything.
We live in a wide variety of temperatures and environments. You're right. As far as the influence that's had on our evolution, it's too soon to say if that's played a role in that. What did you say?
Wisdom teeth, for an example.
Wisdom teeth. What about wisdom teeth?
So like back when it was like a problem to have them, right? People started to remove them, and then those people that had no wisdom teeth had babies, and the babies didn't have wisdom teeth. So eventually, over time, almost nobody's gonna have wisdom teeth because like constantly there's gonna be removals. I think.
Okay. So you are talking about, first of all, I love the example of wisdom teeth. Okay. So what you're suggesting is that because parents had wisdom teeth removed, their children aren't born with them. That's not actually true. Having something surgically removed, if I had my arm cut off in an accident, my children would not be born without arms, right? That's not really how DNA works. My DNA still thinks there's an arm there. What does happen, though, is something becomes evolutionarily inert, unneeded, okay? It becomes vestigial. That's what we call that. That's something we talk about a little bit later. Vestigial organ, for example. We don't really use our appendix that much. Right, we have a tendon on our wrists that we don't use much.
That we have that like goes up and down.
Right, there are lots of parts in our body that are vestigial. At this point, wisdom teeth. We used to use wisdom teeth a lot when we chewed up unprocessed grain a lot of the time, right? We needed that extra set of teeth in the back for extra grinding power. We don't need it anymore. Yes, people are being born without them, but not because their parents had them removed, but because as time goes on, The species does not need them, and unneeded things are inefficient, and our DNA is slowly shutting those things off generation after generation. Give it 100 more generations, more people won't have wisdom teeth than do. Whereas right now, it's rare.
Why do we remove them?
They often grow impacted, growing in sideways. So because it's something that we don't use that often, our body is already in the process of, that's kind of a back burner thing. We're not going to pay too much attention to it. And so sometimes they grow in sideways, and it gives our other teeth or our jawline problems, and so they get removed.
Isn't it because our jaws are a lot smaller than
Yeah,
theirs?
our jaws are a lot smaller as well. That's another evolutionary trait. Yeah. Babies' jaws are getting weaker.
Like noticeably.
Yeah, that probably is very much because of the amount of processed food that we eat versus raw foods, right? Babies eat baby food instead of, giving your babies pieces of fruit or berries or, in addition to milk, right? I mean, babies usually goes milk and then baby food instead of milk and then probably, only 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, raw vegetables and fruit, right? So they don't need as much jaw power. Was there another comment over here? No? Yep, the tendon in the wrist. Yep. Let me give you another example of how we've affected our own evolution. This is purely for the sake of interest, just to make you think. I'm in no way advocating anything here. I'll talk more about that in a second. Prior to our modern civilized state, if an individual was born with a mental condition that prevented them from being able to provide for themselves, that individual would have died off pretty quickly. Now, we have something wonderful and beautiful that is unique to our species as far as we understand it. Empathy, compassion, love. Other species seem to have some version of it. Dolphins, for example, seem to be able to express some forms of love. But we have this wonderful, beautiful empathy for each other that does not let the weakest among us die. We want to support and love and keep alive individuals who are, for genetic reasons or random mutation reasons or simply because they got the bad luck of the die, have some form of mental or intellectual disability. In a completely natural setting, bereft of our empathy, those individuals would die, but they do not. Individuals that are prone to diabetes would die, but they don't. Individuals that are genetically predisposed to cancer would die, but they don't. Hashimoto's disease and any other thyroid condition, all this plethora of physical, genetically passed on abnormality, those individuals would have died off pretty quick. But because we support and love each other, they stay in our gene pool. And that is why, even as our civilization grows, so do the numbers of individuals that are born with these dispositions. We have affected our own evolutionary path as a species by keeping these things in our gene pool. Now, again, I am in no way advocating that anything change. It's simply a fascinating academic observation that by keeping these things in our gene pool, we have effectively slowed down or altered our evolutionary path. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Any questions about evolution, DNA changes, anything like that? Believe me, this is something that we will talk about more as time goes on. Okay. Now, you remember that tree of life I showed you a while back? The actual name for that is a phylogenetic tree. Phylogenetic tree. There are a couple of ways that we can read these. When you go through the literature, when you do your own research, when you read the textbook, when you do any sort of looking into phylogenetic trees at all, you're going to see them represented a couple of different ways. I want to make sure that you can actually read them well, okay? First of all, phylogenetic trees are there to establish evolutionary relationships. What came from what, came from what, came from what? There is another way of describing relationships between organisms over time. We call that cladogenesis. I'll show you some cladograms here in a little bit, but that basically describes, or it groups individuals based upon lineage or by lineage based upon shared traits. I'll show you that here in a little bit. But let's finish talking about phylogenetic trees. Here I have two examples of phylogenetic trees, both of which start with species A. There is species A, right? Easy to understand that. Species A diverges. Evolution happens. There is a flick mutation that causes an organism, an individual in species A, to develop a trait that is successful enough that it passes that trait off to successive generations. And those generations are different enough from the original species A that we now have a species B that has diverged away from them. Okay? Humans with webbed fingers. Okay? How about that? Just for an example. Now, in the top example, both species A and B continue living at the same rate through time. What happens in the bottom example? Yes, there's another divergence. And what did you say? A dies. Why do you say that A dies? It ends. Does it die off? Or do all of the individuals simply change? Don't know, but it's gone. It's not in the fossil record. Hard to speculate, but it's gone. That is indisputable. Species A and A are there after B joins the scene. The difference here is that in the bottom example, species C joins the scene. While A and B may have been able to coexist, the fact that A dies off or is gone for whatever reason after C joins the party could imply A simply could not compete with two other populations that probably use the same resources, probably use those resources more efficiently. Whatever the positive mutation was that caused B and C to diverge from A may have given them enough of an edge that A couldn't compete anymore. And so it is no longer in the fossil record while B and C continue onward. Okay? That's how you should be reading these phylogenetic trees. You can make interpretations based upon those relationships. Okay? Here are a few other examples. Clades are separated. First of all, you will often see phylogenetic trees in this sort of box format, this nested box format, but you'll also see them in these kind of triangle branching off formats. A clade is the way that we group organisms based upon a shared trait. So for example, C and D share a similar trait. B, C, and D share a trait that A does not. And A, B, C, and D all share a common ancestor. Okay? That's just another way of describing that. So a clade, cluster of species sharing a common ancestor. And how do we know that? By examining their traits. So here we have a phylogenetic tree. Okay, this is the phylogenetic tree. Phylogenetic tree. This kind of shaded in area we would call a clade. Where you see the shaded in, that's where I'm trying to make a clade. Okay. I am trying to draw a clade right here between 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 species and these two species because they share some traits. But what's the problem here? Do they share a common ancestor within the bounds of the clade? No. Look at this. These two species come from all the way down here. These 5 species are from that species, right? You have to go all the way down here before you find a common ancestor. So I cannot draw my clade around all of these. I can, however, draw it right here. Why? Because all of the species in this clade that I am referring to come from the same ancestor. Make sense? Should I put it in cookie terms?
Go for it.
Okay. Chocolate chip cookie ingredients, cranberry orange cookie ingredients. Can I put them all in a chocolate chip cookie bin? No. I can put all of these in the same bin though, right? I love how cookie examples have become a thing. All right. Couple examples of clades for you. When I want to describe what species are in a clade and for what reasons, I draw a cladogram. Okay? So, let's see. Relative positions of taxa based on distribution of derived traits. What does that mean? They share traits, which means they come from a common ancestor. Okay? Now, there are some species that may seem to share traits but don't come from the same ancestor. For example, claws on birds versus claws on bugs, right? May seem similar, but you have to go real far back before you find a common ancestor there. And nothing back then had claws. So they are two unique traits that don't come from the same ancestor. Cladograms are drawn using traits that derive from the same ancestor. Here I have a very basic example, okay? The animal kingdom. Oh. If I want to make clades out of the animal kingdom using very basic things, I could say everything with jaws. That's the trait that I want to see, okay? So that excludes our, wouldn't you know it, jawless fishes. Sorry, guys, whoop, you're not in this party. But we've got our jawed fishes, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals. They're all here. Now I want a smaller clade. Everything with lungs. Sorry, jawed fishes, you're out. Everything else, you're in. What about with claws or nails? Reptiles, birds, and mammals. What about things that have fur and mammary glands? Yeah, that's pretty much just reptile or mammals, right? Okay. So that's one way, a very basic example of a cladogram. What about a more detailed one? Every horse that has ever lived. Family Equidae, that's horse, okay? These are all the horses we have in the fossil record. If I want to differentiate them from each other based on trait, what about fewer than 4 toes on the front foot, many teeth shaped like molars? That is only these two groups. That excludes this group. What about molars are tall, cement on all teeth? That is only our modern group, and it now excludes that group, okay? This is how you draw a cladogram. It's all about the traits. What common denominator do you want to study this group of organisms by? Cool? Okay, I got to pick this up. I feel like I'm losing y'all. All right, so let's talk about some misconceptions about evolution. There are a lot of them, okay? The first one, most people kind of think of it as the great chain of being, as if everything in evolution is gradually adding up to something. Now, I have to be careful with this, because there are some very compelling arguments to suggest that maybe the universe follows a direct path similar to evolution, in which organisms that develop in the universe gradually start working together more. It's very compelling. I don't know if it's true or not. As far as science is concerned, though, at this moment of our understanding, things in nature do not just go from simple to complex. That's what the great chain of being kind of refers to. You don't go from a simple organism to a complex organism. Just because there are more complex organisms now than there were 4 billion years ago does not mean that is true. If that were true, we would not have bacteria today. Everything simple would be gone and everything complex would be here, but instead we have both. we have species on Earth that are, if not the same, at least cousins to the same bacterial species that existed billions of years ago. Therefore, the great chain of being cannot be true. Okay? It's not as easy as simple to complicated in evolution. That's not really how it works. It just diversifies more and more over time. Okay? Then there is the problem with ladderizing. What does that mean? Reading this tree left to right. Boom, 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 boom. It's not that A is older than B is older than C is older than D. It's just that A branched off from this common ancestor, and B and C and D branched off from that common ancestor, and C and D branched off from that common ancestor. Don't read it as older, younger. Okay? That's an incorrect way of reading these. Okay? And then you've got groups that had more fossils left behind and groups that have fewer fossils left behind. So it is not correct for me to say that because I have one fossil of this species, that it was dying off, perhaps. Whereas I have 100 fossils of this species and it was more successful. There are so many factors that go into determining whether something can even get fossilized, right? It may not have been the right conditions. Who knows how many organisms lived out there all that time ago that we just don't even have fossils for. We have no idea of knowing how many soft-bodied organisms ever existed, and we have no evidence of them. We just got to remember that when we're making our interpretations so that we don't assume things, okay? And then the last thing is, and I don't have this one written down, evolution does not seek to explain creation. That's not the point of evolution. It never, ever tries to explain how life began. The whole amino acids into DNA thing, that's not evolution. Evolution only seeks to explain how life changes. Okay? Use that information how you will. Again, if you want to have any sort of conversation about how religion and science interact with each other, I'm happy to have that conversation after our class is over. Or if you would like to, if you're an online student, email me about it. I'm happy to have that conversation. It's just not appropriate to have in the classroom, but I do enjoy having those conversations later on. Okay. All right. Taxonomy is the way that we differentiate groups from each other. We give them names, okay? So here we have a distribution of living things, beginning all the way at the top with bacteria, and ending all the way down here with coccolithophores, right? But all of these are they're all living things, right? And you can see how everything kind of branches off from the most recent common ancestor. That's what MRCA stands for, okay? Most recent common ancestor. You can see where their common ancestors were. Bacteria and archaea had a common ancestor, right? Archaea and what would eventually become everything else had a common ancestor. So here we have animals and fungi right there. Oh, we had a common ancestor with them. Do you know we're more related to mushrooms than we are to trees? Mushrooms are closer related to us than they are to trees. Interesting, huh? Okay, so then down here we've got plantae, or where plantae and all of those other plants diverge from these organisms that would go on to become our tiny little sea creatures, okay? Prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Prokaryotes being single-celled organisms, eukaryotes being multi-celled organisms. How do we taxonomically differentiate all of these things from each other? Well, we have a whole system for it, okay? Domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, suborder, superfamily, family, subfamily, genus, and species. We are in domain eukarya, meaning that we are multicelled organisms, right? We are in kingdom Animalia, or animals. Phylum Chordata, you want to guess what that one means? We have backbones. Okay, we're vertebrates. Class Mammalia, we're mammals, well done. Order Primates, easy enough. Suborder, let's skip that. Superfamily, we are hominids, okay? We are a type of primate called hominids. We are genus Homo, species Sapiens. Now, when you are talking about the genus, or genera is the plural of genus, okay? It is always capitalized. However, your species is not, but it is italicized. Homo sapiens, italicized, but only the genus is capitalized, species is not capitalized. Okay? That is our genus and species. All right, real quick, I'm just going to breeze through the rest of this because we're all fading here. It's a long day already, and it's going to be even longer. So I'm just gonna breeze through the rest of this. Okay, you're familiar with most of this already, so it won't take long. All right, prokaryotes, single-celled organisms, are many of them are producers. Okay, what does that mean? They are photosynthesizing, right? They make their own energy using light, and using that light to create chemical reactions. Consumer photosynthesizers are those, or consumer producers are those that consume the photosynthesizers. Now, prokaryotes tend to form the basis for a lot of the food chains. Okay, so the very bottom of the ladder at the food chain, anything happens to the bottom of our food chain, it affects everything going up the food chain, and that is a common theme that we'll see throughout the rest of the class as we study extinctions and all of that. There is a 3.5 billion year old record for single-celled organisms, okay, primarily bacteria and archaea. They can live in some crazy environments. Extremophile bacteria, we call them, that live in water that is at boiling temperatures, or in places like Antarctica, locked in ice. We've also found them living 10 kilometers underground in solid rock. Yeah, they live in crazy places. As a matter of fact, there are some that can survive space conditions. Yet again, the fact that these bacteria can survive in such hostile environments lends credence to the whole panspermia theory. And this is where what I said about Venus earlier comes in. Venus is extremely hot, but it has an atmosphere and it has some water. Really, there's no reason to think that there could not be things living on Venus right now, at least bacteria. Why is Venus so hot? It has a runaway greenhouse gas effect. We don't know how long it's had it. We don't know what Venus was like before it happened. It could have been a much hotter version of Earth. So, theoretically possible, things could be living there. Eukaryotes include protists, those fun little ocean, floating ocean plankton and all of that. Foraminifers I've mentioned before. These are the bottom of the food chain in the ocean, right? Plankton, zooplanktons, all of that. It is these that are responsible for making a lot of those layers of limestone if you're in warm seas, and chert if you're in cold seas, right? They live, they die, they fall to the bottom of the ocean, compact into that siliceous or calcareous ooze, and then get turned into those rocks as time goes on. Green algae is the ancestor of plants. Plants came from algae, photosynthesizing colonies of bacteria that, as time went on, evolved to grow binding tissues. Those binding tissues would eventually start making plant-like tissues that we know and love today. And eventually those plant-like tissues would turn into stems and leaves, and much later on, flowers. Okay? So how did this begin though? Endosymbiosis. Essentially what happens is a consumer cell gobbled up a producer cell. But for some reason, probably because of mutation, it did not actually consume that cell. It didn't dissolve it. It didn't turn it into itself. It absorbed that producer cell, and then that producer cell started giving energy to it. As it's absorbing energy from the sun, it would give some of that energy to the consumer cell. The consumer cell didn't need to consume anymore. It was receiving energy from the photosynthesizing producer inside of it. This is endosymbiosis. And because this was such a positive trait, such a positive result, this cell was able to replicate itself more successfully, live longer. And it had that predisposition to absorb a producer cell and not devour it. And so you end up with those first plant cells that photosynthesize light in a much more, in a eukaryotic system, okay, in a multi-celled system, okay? So that's where all of the cells began that started forming these plant tissues. And then plants were able to move out of water as their cells developed to the point where they could contain water versus needing to stay in water the entire time. Gymnosperms have a much, much longer fossil record on Earth than angiosperms. Remember, angiosperms are flowering plants. Believe it or not, flowering plants didn't actually develop on Earth until the dinosaurs were almost extinct. They came around during the last age of the dinosaurs. Before that, no flowers. Sad, huh? Yeah, Stegosaurus never gave a flower to his girlfriend. How sad for him. He gave her pine cones. Far more romantic. Let's see. Fungi. These are very interesting. Fungi have been around for a very long time. And like I mentioned earlier, are a lot closer to us on the genetic tree, that phylogenetic tree, than they are to plants, interestingly enough. Although plants did come from them, okay, or from organisms like them. First of all, how many of you here like mushrooms? You do? Yeah? Yeah? Do you know that mushrooms have gills? Yeah, the structures on the bottom of that dish around the top, those are gills. We call those mushroom gills. It's very interesting. There are some very interesting things about mushrooms. My brother is fascinated with mushrooms. He actually spends a lot of his time up in Idaho looking for mushrooms. There are mushrooms that grow up there that you can sell for like $40 a pop. He spends his weekends looking for them. Yeah.
Can he not grow them?
It's difficult to make an environment to grow these particular mushrooms. So he just enjoys hunting them. I keep teasing him he's going to get a truffle pig. He probably is actually going to get one. I would not put it past him.
Family, you hunt for rocks and he runs for
I know. My family, we're messed up, aren't we? By the way, can anyone tell me what's wrong with this tree?
Those are just animals and not like species, but like the thing in between them.
We're not above the birds on the tree, you know.
No, but we are in the top right. We are in the place of honor, so to speak, right? We're all the way up there again, aren't we? I mean, we go down here, we could branch out this way, but no. And mammals have to be on top. Animals, we separate into vertebrates and invertebrates, okay? So everything that branches off from this right here, chordates, all of these are vertebrates. Everything else, invertebrate, no backbone, okay? We'll spend time in my class talking about both vertebrates and invertebrates and looking at their fossils. Let's talk about some invertebrates first. Sponges have been around for a very long time. Sponges started to form the first reef systems out in the ocean. A sponge is a simple animal that grows in colonial systems. if you ever look at an ocean sponge, you'll see this big kind of pillow-looking structure a lot of the time. But what you're looking at are hundreds of thousands of actual sponge animals that have grown together to make that system and are working as a colony. You can think of them like that, okay? Cnidarians, yes, that C is silent. It's not cnidarians, it's cnidarians, okay? Cnidarians, like jellyfish and coral and sea anemones, tend to have a 5-pointed body structure, okay? Pentagonal body structure. Radial symmetry, we call that, okay? So sand dollars and all of that, those fall in that category. Mollusks have a couple of distinct features. So this includes snails, octopi. Yeah, those are mollusks. Okay, any cephalopod actually is a mollusk, including squid, ammonites, nautiloids. Okay, brachiopods, bivalves. All of those are mollusks. They travel by means of foot. Snails have a foot. Mollusks, or excuse me, clams, some of them will travel by use of foot if they're not attached to a specific location. These tend to be bottom feeders. Unless they're the swimming kind, like cephalopods, like octopi, they tend to be hunters. But snails, clams, oysters, all of those, they tend to hang out on the bottom and either eat stuff that's on the bottom or just kind of stay in place with suspension feeders out in the water. Bryozoans look very similar to coral, but have been around for a lot longer. They tend to be smaller, and they have a much different animal shape. We'll talk about them more later on. Arthropods, including trilobites, crustaceans, and insects. Insects we still have. Crustaceans we still have. Crabs, lobsters, shrimp, yada, yada. But trilobites are extinct, which is very lucky for those of us that don't like big bugs. You ever seen a pill bug, like one of the roly-polies that curl up whenever they're in danger? Think about that, but a couple feet long. Yeah, those are the larger trilobites. And spiky.
We should get them back.
Get them back?
Yeah.
Yeah, you let me know how that goes. Trilobites, called trilobites for distinct reasons. They have, obviously, 3 lobes that their bodies are made out of. We will talk about them more later on. Trilobites are very significant in the fossil record. We use them as index fossils a lot. They're fantastic index fossils. As are crinoids, which you see here. They are a type of echinoderm. Right now, what you're looking at is a crinoid that has attached itself to the ground and to the bottom of the ocean. We call these sea lilies a lot of the time. This is the main body up here. This is where the kind of flower shape is. Right now, those fronds are actually catching little yummies out of the ocean, out of the water, bringing them to the mouth where it's eaten. But this can actually detach itself and use those fronds to swim around the bottom of the ocean. For the most of the fossil record, they were just flowers stuck in one spot. The ability to move and swim is actually a recent evolutionary adaptation. It's pretty cool. Sea stars, which were formerly called starfish, and I'm not sure why we can't call them starfish anymore, aside from the fact that they're not fish. We call them sea stars now, I guess. Those are also echinoderms, as are sea urchins.
When did the name come up?
I don't know. It's just all of a sudden people are like, oh, we don't call it starfish anymore. They need to be sea stars. Oh, all right, cool. I'll call them sea stars. Okay. Chordates. Let's talk about chordates for a moment. Anything with a backbone. Fish, dinosaurs, birds, all of that. For you and I, let's talk about the most relevant kind. Mammals are broken into 3 categories. Placentals, us, right? Marsupials, kangaroos, wombats, Tasmanian devils, stuff like that. And monotremes. Monotremes are mammals that lay eggs. And there are reptiles that give birth to live young, by the way, like rosy boa constrictors, okay? But monotremes lay eggs. Can anyone name a monotreme? Yeah, the platypus, okay? Oh. Yeah, platypi are monotremes. Also, the echidna is a monotreme. Okay, there are not very many of them left. They are exclusive to Australia. They were the least efficient of the three kinds and are mostly extinct at this point. There are only a few species left on Earth. Whew. Well, I'm done for the day. Any questions before we end?
Wait, is that legit it?
Yeah, that's it.
Why are platypus so weird? They lay eggs, they excrete milk from their armpits, and
Yep.
poison talons,
Yeah.
and a beak.
The question is, why are platypi so weird? They lay eggs, they excrete milk from a patch near their armpits, and they have venomous spurs on their feet. And what's with the bill? Great questions, all of that. Evolution, that's my answer. At some point, those were positive traits. In our world today, they may not necessarily be, but at some point they were. I mean, ish, yeah. Considering that most other monotremes have died off, I'd say that without the intervention of humanity, every monotreme, platypi, echidna, and I don't know, maybe there's a few more out there that we just don't know about yet. I'd say that they would have gone the way of the dinosaurs eventually. Yeah. It's a safe bet considering how many other monotremes have died off over the time. Okay, other questions? See, I told you Module 2 was going to be more fun. Talk about some interesting stuff, don't we? Yeah. All right, I'm going to end it here.